So I watched this show a couple weeks ago. I intended to talk about it. I even had some notes written down, but I didn't get around to recording anything. I figured why not do something now at a point to talk about a forgotten show when I've already almost forgotten about it. So I watched the anime Tsuki wa Higashi ni Hi wa Nishi ni Operation Sanctuary, or known by its shortened title HaniHani Operation Sanctuary. Which I didn't know at the time until you see it in the opening, but the title HaniHani Operation Sanctuary comes from the wa after Tsukiwa, because in Japanese the hiragana ha is also used as a particle with wa, and it takes the first wa and turns it into ha, so it just turns into HaniHani Operation Sanctuary. If you're wondering why it's called Operation Sanctuary, it's because there's a weird sci-fi twist to it. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's talk a little bit more about the show itself. So I found this show a while back because I have this weird obsession with these anime adaptations of visual novels, particularly eroge, that I find it more fascinating to watch an all ages anime of an 18 plus eroge, and something about it is just really fascinating to me. And I go out of my way to seek these types of shows, and it's kind of unusual because like a lot of these shows I don't necessarily have experience with the source material of the Bishoujo games themselves, but regardless I still find them fascinating. Maybe just because I'm a little bit autistic, because all these shows are almost exactly the same, and I'm going to get into why that is in a second as well. But what spurred me to get around to finally watching it, even though I had it on my hard drive for a while, was I purchased this Bishoujo game magazine from eBay. I found it, and there are no scans of it online. Like sometimes a lot of these forgotten magazines are scanned on Sad Panda or something, but this one wasn't. At least not this particular issue. The magazine is called Raspberry, which makes it pretty difficult to search. But this particular volume is volume 12, and it came with basically a drama CD of HaniHani alongside it, and it was the featured game because this is a magazine about Bishoujo games, and it has a giant picture Amagasaki Mikoto on the front. The magazine itself is really interesting. I have an interest, like I enjoy Bishoujo games, but I usually don't play them as much because they're such a fucking time sink. But the whole culture surrounding them is fascinating to me because a lot of times these games are developed, what I'm assuming is on a very shoestring budget, since I don't think a lot of people actually buy these games, at least not compared to like literally any other game being developed in Japan, that they're more so closer to indie despite them being essentially AAA. And the company that developed HaniHani Operation Sanctuary originally and released it in 2003 was August. They also developed Yoake Mai Yori Ruri Irona, released in 2005. That also had an anime, and I've seen the anime for that as well. They also did like Fortune Ethereal, I think that's how you say it, and Daishokan no Hitsujikai, which I think is pretty popular. But anyways, returning back to this, but yeah, like I generally find these Bishoujo game type things fascinating, because a lot of interesting people got their starts within this type of this medium, like a lot of seiyuu and people who do the opening and ending sequences, as well as a lot of the scenario writers. I just think it's something really fascinating because it's such a niche type of and like a way to develop games and whatever. But without further ado, let's actually talk about the show itself. It was a 13 episode series, but each episode was only half length, so there were about 12 episodes, but it included full length opening songs. The opening song was done by
飯塚真由美
and I know her from Avenue, specifically Avenue Project. They had a Denpa project, and I believe one of the other another producer who was part of Avenue Project, Dress, I think he styles his name differently, but they did the opening song for this, and you could kind of hear some of the musical influence from a lot of their other Avenue songs. Though this one is a bit more tame, it's definitely a bit more J-pop, but you can kind of hear the more electronic influences that Dress likes to bring in his production. So the show itself is pretty short, though it has a 4 episode OVA which is kind of an alternate story. Think of like Tomoyo Hen for Clannad, which is like the additional episode. It shows what would have happened if you followed the Tomoyo route, like the alternative route. Since it is a visual novel, there are obviously going to be different routes you can go on. The TV series itself adapted Honami route, which I'm assuming she's kind of like the main heroine, and like the Osana Najimi, the perfect girl kind of thing. I've written extensively about the main heroine and why I kind of feel conflicted about their character archetype before, so I'm not gonna get too far into that. But the OVA, the alternate story, is with the other heroine, Mikoto, who interestingly enough is voiced by Nakata Junko, who was prevalent within the hentai seiyuu sphere. I always find it interesting when I research a seiyuu, and especially with a relatively low budget unknown show like this one. And it turns out like a lot of the seiyuu had worked on hentai before, which I think is fascinating to think about that. Like this could have been their big break and they could have stopped doing hentai, but since they worked on this show that wasn't necessarily popular, they ended up not getting that big break if they wanted it, I guess. But anyways, the show itself, it feels very familiar, especially to someone like me who watches a lot of these types of shows. I was drawing a lot of parallels between this and Da Capo. Basically uses a lot of the very similar archetypes this show tends to rely on heavily. And a lot of times there are characters who are analogous to the same ones in Da Capo being developed before this. I think Da Capo came out in 2002, and it was widely popular, and a lot of games were influenced by it afterwards. But, you know, we have the classic, we have the Osana Najimi, we have the blonde twin-tail tsundere. There's an astronomy club. I don't know why, but it seems to be more prevalent than I see a lot of people take note of. That why do all these eroge happen to have an astronomy club? It kind of seems like perfect for to host a type of club that does jack shit kind of thing. Like earlier in the week, I watched the anime Ebiten because it was written by Skaji, who is the scenario writer for Tsubahibi. But in Ebiten, it focuses on the astronomy club in there as well. And the club basically does nothing. They just fuck around all the time. So I guess that might be why. There's also the other eroge, Hoshimemo, which also surrounds an astronomy club, though that one actually talks more about astronomy. But in HaniHani, it's like the astronomy club is kind of there, and they talk about the stars maybe once, and that's it. It's kind of like a shoehorned in thing. It could have literally been any other club. There's also the MILF nurse. This is a trope that I see a lot, and I kind of enjoy it. Like a lot of shows have this. It's either the MILF nurse or like the MILF teacher. And I guess this is like to appeal to the type of person who really enjoys sexualizing their teacher, or at least within their like the context of Bishoujo games. This is like a reoccurring theme. You see the cool nurse with like purple hair and she has glasses but are slightly lower down her nose, and she's always smoking and has the white lab coat kind of thing. So we got that. I'm just running down the checklist. There's also magical realism here as well. Magical realism is very prevalent within a lot of these eroge and bishoujo games. I'd like to attribute that to the popularity of key games, which started to be developed in the very tail end of the 90s into early 2000s, with games like Canon and Air leading the charge. Maeda Jun being the scenario writer for a lot of those. He was very influential on the works of these, and I start to see a lot of magical realism being shoehorned into a lot of these games, partially due to the fact that they need to have something more than just slice of life elements, because a lot of these games are just slice of life. They're all exactly the same. They all start with the Osana Najimi character somehow miraculously appearing in the protagonist Kun's room and waking him up, and that's how the games always start. I mean, I don't necessarily mind that development to open a game, but like they all open like that. I don't know why. There's some elements of magical realism in here. Like there's like Mikoto she's an angel, and I don't think that's even like fucking explained at all. Despite the fact that there's like a parallel world or something, and the main character Naoki has a doppelganger that kind of wants to kill him at the beginning. And it's pretty fucking wild. It's always interesting within these shows when they start throwing curveballs like that. They introduce this weird magical realism thing that takes the usual like slice of life elements and like just completely turns them on their head and juxtaposes it to this weird otherworldly Sekai K or like sci-fi story for literally no reason. And I just find that fascinating. Like in this one, there's like a parallel world there, which I guess it might have been influenced by the whole Clannad thing. But anyways, there's also quantum physics. The show starts to introduce time travel towards the end, and I think that's kind of where it lost me. So the show itself, the first couple episodes, it's just your standard fare Bishoujo game kind of thing. We have all your classic events and everything. You have your beach episode. Like I mentioned before, you have the Osana Najimi character waking the protagonist Kun up to open up the game. You have characters just dicking around in their club, not actually doing anything. You even have like the classic what is it, like the fitness testing day? Or it's the day when the girls get their 3 sizes and they get weighed. You know, every girl complains that their bust hasn't grown and they ended up putting on weight instead or something. Like, I don't understand who that event is for. I don't really find it interesting because I've never been able to wrap my head around 3 sizes, but that's there if you're into that kind of thing. What was mostly weighing on my mind was these familiar type of characters. I was initially taken aback by the character Shibugaki Matsuri, who is kind of like she's our twin-tail tsundere in this show. But she's very similar to Daikuji Ayu from Kimi no Zo, which is another Bishoujo game adaptation anime. Though that one is significantly better than this, but Daikuji Ayu is another blonde, twin-tailed tsundere type of character who also works at a family restaurant. I don't know what it is about these characters, but they always work at a fucking family restaurant. Though she also reminded me a lot of Yoshino Sakura from Da Capo, because they're both, another blonde, twin-tailed tsundere type character. So you start to see a lot of parallels with this. Like, when you've seen the amount of these types of shows that I have, you start to, like, everything starts to blend together. Also, an interesting note that the MC in this show, Naoki, he had the same seiyuu as the protagonist in Air, which is another Bishoujo game adaptation, though that one's by Kyoto Animation. Not as good because it's cut very short, but it definitely looks better than this show. So this show didn't necessarily look that bad. I think all things considered for the type of show it was, or it didn't look terrible. The characters moved fine. There was definitely plenty of sequences where the characters were off model. I distinctly remember this one where Mikoto, her face when she was like in a pool or something was really distorted in a hilarious way. So I'm going to briefly touch on the story, or at least what I remember of it. So basically there's this whole parallel world type of thing, and the main character has amnesia. Surprise, surprise. A lot of these games involved amnesia. This one wasn't used as well, expectedly. So he has this amnesia and he's living with his uncle and aunt because there was this event that happened a few years back that caused his parents to die, or at least disappear. It's assumed that they are dead, though they were transported into the parallel world. I don't even know if it's possible they could be alive. The show might have even explained that they were dead, but it doesn't make sense how just simply transporting them to another dimension would kill them instantly. There's this whole other parallel world thing going on. And he learns of this through our secondary heroine, Mikoto, who falls out of the sky one day as our protagonist is like laying on a bench. She just fucking flies out of the sky and like lands on him. This is your sudden girlfriend appearance here. Another common trope within these types of shows. And through her, after their whole slice of life by the book Antics, we learn that the parallel world, there is incurable disease, an incurable virus, if you will, which I guess is, fairly relevant with the current climate of the world. But anyways, there's this incurable disease, and she has found herself in this world and needs to find her brother Yusuke because he is there and he's causing some trouble. But it's later revealed that Yusuke is being used as a guinea pig by our MILF nurse. I don't remember her name. She doesn't matter. She kind of does, but it doesn't matter for me. So the MILF nurse is actually in league with the principal, and they're trying to develop a cure for this disease. They're using Yusuke as a guinea pig to do so because I guess he volunteered. I think there's some canon explanation for why he's doing it or something, but anyways. So Yusuke is there, and our protagonist Naoki is like, what the fuck, why are there 2 of me? We later realize that the reason there's 2 of the same exact character is because the event from a couple years prior in which Naoki lost his memory, from what I recall, and from what made sense to me, because this doesn't make sense at all, but from this event where this giant beam appeared and transferred, like this was the event that essentially killed his parents and resulted in his amnesia, created a clone of himself, and the clone was taken to the alternate dimension and known as Yusuke. They both had amnesia at that point, so there was two versions of him just in different dimensions, which I guess makes kind of sense if you subscribe to the whole multiverse theory, but in that sense, there would have already been a clone of himself. So, like, this is what I'm saying. It doesn't really make sense, and it's kind of retarded that they start shoehorning in this weird sci-fi elements at this point. So, basically, all we need to know is that there's two Naokis. One of them is living in a parallel world, and the other one is living back in modern-day Japan. The whole idea of the Operation Sanctuary comes in at this point, and that's where our MILF nurse and our principal, who are developing the vaccine, alongside their teacher, the lowly teacher. Like, I'm pretty sure this predates Honey Pony Dash with the lowly teacher. Does it predate Index? That's the question. I don't think it does. This was 2004. Index, I think, started in 2002, at least the light novel. I'm not sure if the specific lowly teacher character appeared, but I think she appeared within the first couple volumes. But now I'm getting on a weird tangent. So this Operation Sanctuary it's used like the characters from the parallel world. They came to our world where there is no disease, and they are developing this cure for it, and they're testing it on Yusuke with the hopes of, figuring it out and then taking it back. So where does that leave us? It doesn't really leave us anywhere. It gets really dumb and kind of confusing towards the last couple episodes. And this is the problem I have with a lot of these shows. When they try to add this weird Sekai K element or this weird sci-fi elements towards the latter half. And especially in a show like this where you can clearly tell that it's not really aimed at a demographic of people who would necessarily be interested in these things. A lot of people are just playing these games because they want to get those CGs, and they want to have the H scenes. They're primarily motivated by the thing between their legs, and having these weird, more cerebral topics, dare I say, because they're not exactly executed the best. But they start to add these elements that aren't necessarily fleshed out that well, especially within the anime. Maybe in the game it's explained more, but it's like one of those things where your character suddenly comes to the realization that there's something bigger going on, and this would usually be done in an exposition dump in one of these games, which like I'm kind of reminded of like Muv-Love or something that would do something like that. But this one doesn't. It just kind of happens in an episode, but the episodes are really short and it doesn't really explain things fully. And it's not really that fleshed out of an idea anyways. So if you're watching the show like I am and you're interested in it just specifically because it's an anime adaptation of an eroge, you're probably not going to find this interesting. And if you're someone who enjoys watching or seeing stories about time travel and parallel worlds, this show will not be for you because the ideas aren't fleshed out enough. It doesn't really strike a balance, and it seems that it doesn't have a core audience in mind. It just kind of wanted to try these ideas, which, I mean, I applaud it for its ambition, but I guess that's the only thing I could commend it on, because it doesn't really do too well in any category of either storytelling or characterization, because the storytelling, like I said, it kind of feels half-assed in both regards and not really capitalizing on its strengths. And in terms of its characterization, it kind of feels like it's just rehashing a lot of characters that people who are typically playing Bishoujo games probably have seen before. So it doesn't really separate itself, besides, like the aforementioned, ambitious story. Though I think the anime itself was pretty interesting, only because it's fairly easy to work through, since, like I said, they are half-length episodes. So even though it is 13 episodes, it's more equivalent to like 6 or 7 in terms of runtime. So you can blast through it in a day if you have nothing better to do. Though obviously there are better shows to watch out there. The show itself, like, the production itself didn't seem half-assed. The seiyuu were giving pretty decent performances, even from Midorikawa Hikaru, who is the seiyuu for Naoki, whom I mentioned before. And like a lot of the other seiyuu, like I mentioned, Nakata Junko, who typically does hentai work, she did a pretty good job here as Mikoto, given her background and whatever. So the show itself didn't seem that bad. Like, it's passable in a lot of these things. But it's definitely something that you have to be really into Bishoujo game adaptations like me, or dare I say a fan of the original source material. Because, like, if you're a fan of the source material already, you probably read the game in Japanese or something. There's only been the trial released in English, which is just like the very first part of the game. So I doubt many English speakers have had experience with the game itself. And this isn't necessarily the best way to go about experiencing the game, but like it's kind of like a crash course. It gives you like a very broad overview of what the game has to offer, but kind of does it injustice. But I can't obviously speak of that. Perhaps the game itself, maybe it's a kamige, I have no idea. Maybe the characters are really deep, but I like I said, I can't tell you because the game might have fleshed them out more. A lot of times these Bishoujo games, the way they go about characterization is through endless dialogue and endless slice of life elements, which they use as an excuse for characterization and character development. Obviously, if you listen to someone talk long enough, you will get a good understanding of them, especially if it's just their everyday life. Like you watch a vlog of someone or you read someone's blog, and eventually you get a good idea and a good feel for who they are. And that's kind of what these Bishoujo games do. Characters just talk ad nauseum about random bullshit, and the scenario writers assume this is a pretty good way to give depth to a character. Though I will say Naoki is a main character, not as annoying as a lot of other protagonists from these type of shows are. Time to wrap up things here, but the show, it's pretty average. It wasn't bad. I found myself enjoying parts of it, though that's mostly just due to my bias of enjoying these types of shows. And I think it's also interesting too because it's kind of one of those forgotten anime that a lot of people really haven't seen. On Mal, it's scored by about 2,000 people, which is fairly low. Only 7 people have it on their favorites. So it's one of those shows that have been forgotten even though it was fan sub back in the day. But these are the types of shows that will certainly be forgotten if, like there haven't been efforts to re-release it. The release group Jumonji Giri, who does a lot of these types of shows that I've grown intimately familiar with their work as a result, they released the DVD version of this show, so you can go find that and torrent that. It includes the subs by fan subgroup IU as well as static subs. The static subs script is actually pretty terrible. So watch IU fan subs for this one if you get your hands on that. So that's basically about it. The show, like I mentioned, the show isn't going to be blowing you away. It tries to adapt like a 30-hour game or whatever into a 6-episode anime essentially. And even though it does have the OVA, which is like an alternate ending, it definitely doesn't help. And I ultimately felt like the show itself is not really worth watching. It doesn't really do too much well. It's just fascinating to know it exists kind of thing. So I guess that's my extended ramble about HaniHani Operation Sanctuary, in which I spend more time talking about things surrounding the show than talking about the show itself.